The world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne. Hey everyone, it's your host Kate Byrne. So out of the mouths of babes, such a common saying, and it seems so fitting. And what happened when such a babe actually woke up a very high-powered executive who then realized, wow, wait a minute, the ladder she climbed may need to be redesigned. Well, in this episode of Women Advancing, I'm going to delve into exactly that as I sit down with Tina Fox, who's the founder of TERN Mentoring and the architect of a new model for mentorship and intergenerational women's leadership. We're going to unpack why traditional mentorship often misses the mark, how sponsorship changes the game, why you actually need both, and why they're not always from the same origin space, and what it really takes to build something that scales without losing soul and intimacy. She's going to be very real and share what sparked TERN and why the name matters, a story that I love, and the blind spots that hold even the most accomplished women back, and the messy, meaningful process of, frankly, reimagining your success on your own terms. Sometimes, that's right, you got to swipe it all down, take it down to dirt, and start all over again. So this one, to me, this one's for anyone realizing that you're living a life when really what you want to live is a legacy, and how to get there. Join me. Hello, Women Advancing world. We are in for a treat today. Why? Because we have none other than the illustrious and extraordinarily wise Tina Fox, who's the founder and CEO of TERN Mentoring. Tina, welcome. Welcome to Women Advancing.
Thank you, Kate. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Great to see you after the conference.
Thanks so much. We have a lot to dive into, so let's get started. I want to start before TERN, and we'll get to that point. What were you doing, and who was Tina Fox prior to starting your own enterprise?
Yeah, I was somebody who was in the working world. I was doing my thing, mom of 2 kids, bonus mom of 1 kid, busy mom, and just loving life and just kind of cruising along in my singular lane of med tech. It's something that I connected with after college. I became a business development specialist, and I continued in all of those roles up through leadership for Fortune 500 and for Silicon Valley and Western area startups. And it was a blast. I was having a good time. And then it just needed to end, and I became an accidental entrepreneur.
So isn't that the way, right? There's this sort of like dun, dun, dun. One day you wake up, because that all sounds amazing and great until it's not enough. And then you're thinking, oh, why can't it be enough? And then on the other hand, yay, it's not enough. That means I'm in for something new. So what was that moment? And then you went on to lead, TERN Mentoring.
Yeah, so it really was a moment. It wasn't something that I had been actively thinking about. I wasn't thinking about leaving my corporate job. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I had worked really hard in order to ascend into certain levels of med tech. There wasn't a lot of women in those levels. I loved all the perks. I mean, certainly, benefits, 401k matching. I mean, stock options. There was a lot of things that the corporate world gave me. And it also gave me a sense of security, right? I've never in a million years thought that I would be the owner of my own company, that I would be out there, having to be the CEO and chief bottle washer all at the same time. But that's what happened. And that one moment for me was, one of those things where when I was traveling towards the end of my career, and I was traveling up to 90% of the time. So I had become a mom later in life. I had 2 boys of my own, 36 and 38 years of age. And when that happened, I was traveling all the time. And what I realized is when kids are younger, they don't really have a concept of time, right? Yeah. They don't know that it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, etc. But then at age 5, my older son, he started realizing duration of time. He started realizing she's gone a short period of time or she's gone a long period of time. And my suitcase became a source of anxiety for him. So I needed to relegate myself to either leaving on the red eye, because I was traveling a lot, out west, either leave on the red eye late at night or leave early in the morning before he got up. So I was on another one of those East Coast, West Coast trips, and it was about 4:30 in the morning. I was zipping up my suitcase. The house was dead quiet. Next thing I know, I see my son come into the closet and he pokes me in my lower back, and he had gotten out of his bed. He had his little green whoopee, big green eyes, and he just looked at me and he says, "Mommy, you've been gone too long."
Oh.
And that was the moment. That was the moment that absolutely like shattered everything that I thought was going so right and so well. I was loving my career. I was loving being a mom, and it was no longer enough, like you said. And so I spent the next 6 months flying around the earth, looking out that window, realizing, wow, things are really small down there. Like, problems that seem so big in your face, when you look out a plane window, it just seems to put it in a different perspective. I did ask my CEO, and this is before the time of Zoom and remote work and all that stuff. I did ask him if there would be any way that, we could work something out, because I was a high performing person for the company.
Right.
And I was
so it would sting if you left.
Well, and I was just trying to work out something. Everybody's replaceable as far as, I've been told. But at the same time, he didn't really have a lot of empathy for me. He just said, the guys figure it out. They have to leave their homes and their families too. You're just going to have to figure it out. So there wasn't, any support there. And then my husband, looking at what we were, doing, and we had this common goal of family first, he said, "Why don't we start our own business?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" Because that's a terrible idea. And his specialty is in title and settlement, and mine is in business development. And he said, "Why not take our two specialties and combine them? Let's burn the boats and, let's create our own company." And it took longer than that conversation to convince me. He actually decided to, start doing things on his own. And I ended up, instead of joining him, I ended up taking a demotion of 9 levels. So if you counted all the things that I had climbed over the 22 years, I needed to dial it back. And, that's the circuitous path, right? So
Yep.
I wasn't used to that path, but it was the necessary path. So I dialed it back. I spent about a year and a half in that role, which, to be perfectly honest, it would be like going back to high school.
Yeah, no.
Nobody wants to do it, but because we've already done it, we probably would do it better. So I did that role far better than I did when I first started out in the business. But at the same time, there was no joy in what I was doing. It was just kind of checking the boxes and moving things along. And I did well in that role. But, I also went back to my husband and I said, "So let's talk a little bit more about this building a business thing together." And he said, "Well, what do you need to be convinced?" And I said, "Well, I think I'd like informational interviews with, let's go with 10 people in your industry that I don't know well, because it's not my industry, that I could just sit down and have a conversation with to really better understand what's going on and why would we work or we not work." And it was an interesting 10 interviews. He did get me all of the information with big time brokers and, real estate agents and lenders and even competitors. And I was like, okay, I think I'm getting this. And then I also asked him, because I had trained at one of my corporations, and I find that when people can teach, they really know their stuff. And it's, how does the audience receive that education? So I said, "I need to see you teach 2 large classes, because I want to see how you're received and, if you kind of know your stuff. I really don't know, because I haven't worked with you before." And so he satisfied all of those things for me, which I'm such a pain in the ass, but he satisfied all those things for me. And I really had no excuse, Kate. I had to join him. And so that was actually my first entrepreneurial venture, was becoming a co-owner of, our title and settlement business in Arlington, Virginia, called Cobalt Settlements. And I spent 5 years doing that. And we built out a lovely small business in Arlington, and we're really proud of it. We're really proud of the team. They do amazing work. But then at about 5 years in, he said to me, "I knew this was never your thing, but you decided, because it was our goal, lifetime goal for family first, that we would do this together." And he's like, "But if you want to go pursue something else, why don't you go do that?" And ever since I was 15 and 8 months and the state of Virginia gave me the permission to get a work permit, all I've done is pursued work. And now I was in a position to pursue a passion, but I had no idea what that was going to look like. I was like, so now what am I supposed to do with my life? So talk about midlife crisis. Midlife crisis to the nth degree, by the way. There's nothing that I do that's small, it seems like, because
It's got to go exponential.
well, that was just it. So he gives me this gift of like, hey, like, go find something for yourself. Now, at the time, I did have an opportunity. I had been doing some sidebar consulting with a wonderful organization called Women on Course, and it's headed by Donna Hoffman. And Donna had asked me if I would like to become co-owner of the organization because she wanted to spin out a corporate side. And it's a national group of about 60,000 women in 15 cities, and they leverage the game of golf in order to support women in networking. So I was like, this is going to be so much fun. So I said yes to that opportunity, but I hadn't started yet. I had the summer to kind of like, take a little bit of a break, have a good time with the kids, all that stuff. And excited about the opportunity. By the way, I was also volunteering back at my university, and that's a very important point. I was excited about the opportunity. However, I was still in the back of my mind noodling on this concept of what am I going to be when I grow up? Like, how am I going to live my legacy? Turns out when the kids went back to school and I was getting ready to now join Donna, I fell into a really interesting situation health-wise. I contracted Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, what is that? That is congestive heart failure.
Oh my gosh.
It's a rare form. Its primary target is women. And it's where the layman's way of me explaining this, it's also known as broken heart syndrome, but I have no broken heart from the standpoint of losing a loved one or anything like that.
Right.
I think my broken heart was I couldn't figure out who I was going to be.
Oh, wow.
And I was really sad about that. So, when people are like imposter syndrome or I'm 21 and I'm graduating from college, what am I going to be? Well, listen, that happens even in your 40s, 50s. You can have that as a lifelong, underlying issue. So that's what I had. So I had to put the whole going on to, Women on Course on hold. And then I was able to luckily get out of Takotsubo after months of cardiac rehab and medications and hospitalizations. When I came out, it gave me time to think. And what I decided was in all of my volunteering for my university, I was really feeling this pull towards everything that I was doing on the side for fun, which was mentoring. And I was a guest lecturer at my university. I was a board member. I chaired a board. And so I really loved my time there. And I found that there was still a need. And making a very long story towards its end is that, one of the professors, Professor Carol Hamilton, wonderful professor at James Madison University. She had just looked at me one day, and despite all the stuff that we were already doing together with guest lecturing, I was giving back the 3 T's, as they like to say, time, talent, and treasure, right? Mm-hmm. She said, I think there's more you can do. And I was a little perplexed as to what more was. I was like, I'm kind of tapped out, as far as how much extra. And then I came up with this idea because I was loving the mentoring so much. I said, why don't I help you build a mentorship program for your class? And so it was that seed of, not being able to figure out myself, but just finding a place to go help other people. Right. And then from there, I started researching and I realized there really wasn't anything like what I was offering anywhere. And so I looked at my husband and I said, hey, I think I figured out what I want to be when I grow up. And I think I want to live my legacy through mentorship. And I think I can get others to do the same. And I'm going to build out this company called TERN Mentoring. And that's how it all started.
Wow.
Not on purpose.
Right. Yeah, always the accidental. So what does TERN stand for? Is it an acronym for something?
No. So you see that bird right over my head?
Yeah. Oh, it's a tern. I know a tern. Ah.
So the reason for TERN, TERN mentoring is because I remembered there was a naturalist that had once told me about these birds that, they did these journeys, but they always came back home to roost. And I started when I was looking up a name for my company because I was like, I wanted to, it's like naming a baby, right? You're like, somebody gonna make fun of this name, blah, blah, blah. Of course, everybody misspells TERN. So that's probably my one hiccup there. But the meaning is important because of all the different migratory paths on Earth. That bird, the Arctic tern, has the longest migratory path. It goes from pole to pole. And by the way, in no sequential order. It just kind of meanders everywhere. But inevitably, it comes back to the exacts in order to bring the next generation forward. And I thought, that's a mentor's journey. We leave our universities, we go on these circuitous paths around the world. And then the goal is that we hopefully come back to help the next generation move forward. So I thought it was an appropriate name, and it stuck with me.
I love that. That's incredibly powerful. The other thing too is that those who are the mentees then go on to do the same, hopefully at some point,
Yes.
I'm sure. Okay, so there's a couple of different questions I want to ask. One is, just out of curiosity, going back to when you were in the corporate spot that you're in and you had to be demoted. How did you get through that?
Oh, that's a good question. You know,
Because a lot of people who are probably in that spot, or when you're, to your point, you had to take steps back, knowing it would eventually help you get the oomph that you need for that leap forward. But that's a real ding, especially when you have been so successul.
you're the first person that's asked me that question, by the way, which I find really interesting. So you're going to get the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Yeah.
So it was no picnic.
No.
What was interesting about the interview was I showed up at the interview because a friend of mine had said, "Hey, I heard your call to find something that makes you more local as opposed to having to travel. I think this opportunity would be good for you." And I said, "Okay." And then I went to the interview because it's a trusted friend. And in that interview, the gentleman who was interviewing me said, "I've only got 2 questions for you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "One, why are you doing this?" Because he had researched me, I guess. And I said, "Well, for me, a huge value in life is my family. And I can't figure out a way to do what I was doing before and satisfy being a more present parent to my kids. So something had to give, and I'm going to regroup and figure it out. I've never burnt a bridge. I just need some time to get it all together. But this job, I can do. I can do with my eyes closed." And I said, "Well, what do you need done?" And he said, "Well, this area is a disaster. The customers hate us. The last rep did not do a good job. You know, I need this thing cleaned up because, quite honestly, it's the albatross around my neck to get me to President's Club. In my entire area that I manage, this is the one that I need cleaned up and done." And he's like, "Can you do that for me?"
What an incredibly transparent, honest, I mean, in some ways, wow. In other ways, kind of, okay, great. I know who you are. You know who I am. Let's be adults. Got it.
It was one of the most fascinating interviews I had ever gone through.
Yeah.
So I said, "All right." I said, "Yeah, I'm your turn it around gal." And he said, "Okay, great." And I was like, "So give me a year."
Fair. That's what I would have said.
And he said, "Okay." So the next year he was on stage getting the President's Club this and da 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 da. And that was when I was having these conversations with my husband about, moving out of corporate and moving into entrepreneurship. And I looked at my boss at the time and I said, "So I delivered, and now it's time for me to consider leaving." And he was like, "Can you help me through a transition, da da da." And so I did that. So it was bittersweet. Towards the end, though, there was one little hiccup. I had come to find out that there was an opportunity for a higher level role in that company, which I had already done that role in other companies. And I was not given the opportunity to interview for it until somebody had accidentally told me that it was open. They had not posted it. They had kept it kind of secret, and they had already earmarked who they wanted for that promotion.
That's so classic.
So, one of the myths that I like to bust in corporate America is that, if you think there aren't already people lined up for certain jobs, you're mistaken. And, posting is just a formality. But in this case, they had not posted it. So they were caught a little bit with their pants down on this one, to be honest with you. And then because I had made it known to my management team that I found out through alternate methods, and then they backed up the bus and they quickly entered me into the interview process. But, sometimes things happen for you, not to you.
I think all the time things happen for me, not to me.
And as much as I had wanted the opportunity to interview and to be able to get that job because I knew I could also do that job, like I said, they had already earmarked somebody for it. So that individual got that job. And I ended up quietly exiting. And probably the best thing that ever happened to me, to be honest with you.
Clearly. So with mentorship, I know there's mentorship, kind of checking the boxes. Hi, how are you? Blah, blah. And then there's real deal membership. What do most people miss or get wrong? And how do you get it right?
Yeah. So with mentors, it's, am I qualified? number one question I get asked by mentors, which I love getting asked that question by a mentor because I immediately feel as though they are, based on the humility in them asking the question in the first place. Right. And so I'm quick to then throw out my own question, which is, well, let me ask you, is there anything that you could provide in your own personal or professional experience to your 18 to 21-year-old self that would be of extreme benefit? And 100% of the time, the answer is yes. And I look at them and I say, then you're more than likely to be qualified as a mentor. So that's on the mentor side. On the mentee side, the thing that a lot of mentees get wrong is, they don't recognize the power of mentorship. They recognize the power of the internet, Google, now all the AI that's out there. They recognize the power of all of that, but they don't recognize the power of the interpersonal through mentorship. And so, a lot of times I have to help walk them down the road of, listen, as much as you have all of this tech at your advantage, and believe me, I understand. I own an ed tech company. There's also this other side, and that is the interpersonal. And the communications major in me says, if mentorship is nothing else, it is definitely interpersonal.
Which is huge. And especially to your point, in this day and age of AI, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I'm waiting for everybody, so many different industries, to all of a sudden have their, AI bot who does these kinds of things. It'll be kind of interesting. Share what TERN Mark mentorship is and does. I should have done that in the beginning.
Oh, sure. So TERN Mentoring, we're an EdTech platform, but more importantly, we're also a mentoring program. And what we do is we partner the alumni of universities back with the undergraduate students. Our partners are the universities. So the universities pay for our platform. We are the conduit in which both of those two connect. And we work with them, inside the classroom, in their specialty groups, in order to make all of that very seamless. Right. To not only do it for the interpersonal, but what we're trying to do is also scale this, because a lot of mentorship programs are not scalable. Right. So we're trying to scale it. And we're also looking at key data points in order to showcase how we are moving not only the students, but also the mentors and the university into better areas through mentorship, whether it's leadership, whether it's, alumni connection, whether it's student preparedness for post-collegiate. We're moving them into a better area through our data gathering.
Well, and the thing that's great about that is the universities win, because you're also giving their alumni, it's another contact point. They feel completely, like a TERN coming back to roost, where else
exactly
magic happened. And that worked. And why women often get stuck with one when they actually really need the other.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I look at it as mentorship, sponsorship, championship, actually. There's like a third level to me. So mentorship is really the interpersonal. It's probably the most vulnerable of all three. It's where you have more one-on-one. You feel like you're in a safe space with an individual to have discussions on all different kinds of topics, professional, personal, because they do bleed into the other. Right. The sponsorship championship part, they're similar but different in my opinion. So they're similar in that these are individuals that are typically within a business or an entity that's going to help support you into some sort of promotion or activity that's going to help you grow from a professional standpoint. The difference between the sponsorship and the championship is I look at champions more as like the C-suite level people. It's almost like when they speak, people listen, right? Because they're leaders of the company. Whereas sponsors may be more of the direct hiring individuals. They might be the ones that become your bosses, right, in the future. So that's the delineation that I give it. But those are the big differences. And the second part of what you mentioned is, women with the sponsorship versus the mentorship. You need all of it. You need all of it, right? You need to have...
Exactly. You need as many allies with whatever label they have speaking your favor.
Yeah. And, I'm going to point out an elephant in the room that I don't think a lot of people talk about. I think, having spent 22 years in corporate, I think it is extraordinarily difficult to find mentors within your own company. Yeah. And here is why. And it was proven out in a podcast that I hosted last week with business leaders from across the United States. And we were all in agreement that when it comes to mentorship, oftentimes people will look for mentors that are outside of their organization. And the reason for that is the proximity, right? When people are inside of an organization, they may not feel the opportunity to be as vulnerable, or that it is a safe space because of corporate politics, because of things that, you don't know at the water cooler. So people are a little hesitant to engage in deep, meaningful mentorship within a corporation where you're partnering people of the same company. Now, if you've got a huge organization and people are West Coast, East Coast, different departments, I think you have a better shot at it in that situation. But many of the folks that were on the call last week were talking about how they themselves seek individuals that are maybe company adjacent to them, and so they get what they're doing within their organization, but they aren't, within the organization. So I see that happening. But I think for women, it's important to identify, like, don't just stay in your lane. If you're med tech, if you're ed tech, if you're whatever you are, those just happen to be mine. Try to find people that, are adjacent to you and seek out their mentorship and connect with their network while working on who's going to sponsor you to your next level of success, whatever that is for you in your own organization.
Which makes sense anyway, too, because also when you go, as you point out, to the adjacent, there's all sorts of other great things that happen. I mean, there's either just ideas for innovation, for partnership, all sorts of, for solutions. Hey, this area in this sector, they did this. Wonder what would happen if we applied that kind of thinking to issues that we're facing with.
Absolutely. I mean, we met at the Tom Tom Festival in Charlottesville, and at that festival, one of the reasons why I found it so empowering is because there were so many different founders there. And they were sharing their ideas. They were sharing their hiccups. They were sharing, of so many things. And they weren't necessarily in my industry. My notebook was filled with ideas because I was just listening to their stories, and it just sparked something in me. So I agree. And I did not appreciate that whole getting outside of your lane until I became an entrepreneur. And then I realized through networking with people of all different programs, companies, that's when I was like, wow, there is something so applicable over there that I could use. And it took me a long time to get there, Kate.
No, I get it. And I'm going to also call out something that annoys me a lot. And I'm going to make sure, to that point, everything is really, there's always some sort of relevance and kernel of utility, I think, in different people with whom you cross paths with. And I would say we've all been there. We've all gone to a conference. Someone walks up, they talk, and then within 30 seconds, they look over your shoulder because they're like, oh, you can't get me this, or this. I can't stand that. And the truth is that person is probably actually able to help you, I would say. So don't just discount automatically, someone who's not going to be able to give you money, or there's always something. They can give you connection. They can give you, innovative ideas, all sorts of things. But what's a common blind spot? You've worked with all these people, high-performing women, high-performing men, mid-performance, etc. What is a common blind spot or limiting belief that you see that you wish we could, and how do you help reframe it?
So I'm going to bring up something that was brought up last week, but it's also something that we study. And I think everybody experiences it. And I mentioned it earlier. It's the imposter syndrome, right? So what everybody gets wrong about this is that it's this thing, and, only certain people own it. You own it typically because you haven't been there before. And so that's why you own this imposter syndrome. And that, over time, it just goes away. And I think that's what people get wrong. And what I love about the stories that I hear at TERN Mentoring, when we partner, this 18 to 21-year-old student with somebody of any generation thereafter, they find out, wow, that person, even though their title is chief of staff or CEO or whatever the title is that they were partnered with. And again, we partner them with people they don't know. So these are complete strangers. So there's a lot of imposter syndrome for the student going into this, because they're like, what am I going to say to this, person of such and such title? But then they realize so quickly that that's just another human being. And, we all suffer our own things on this planet, and we all have our hurdles to overcome. And so that's the thing that people get wrong, is they think that you're the only person that owns imposter syndrome, when the reality is that everybody owns it. And we just, we need to get through it. We just need to get through it. And to your point, don't be so surface level curious. Like, what's your name? What's your rank? Can you do something for me? Get a little bit more authentically curious about that person, and you will find out things that you were so grateful you stuck around and asked a couple more questions in the conversation.
Yeah. You know, it always reminds me of like old college party days. What's your name? What's your major? The same kind of thing. That's
Got to go further. It's got to go further.
higher that. You got to scrape a little bit more. But so to that point, vulnerability. I have always thought that plays such a strong role to me in strong leadership. As a woman, oftentimes we're slapped with this notion of, oh, you're being too emotional, or, oh my gosh, you're so sensitive. How do we normalize that and actually help others recognize that as, honestly, that's kind of my secret sauce?
Yeah. So obviously Brene Brown, got to give a shout out to her because she's the queen of, research and vulnerability. And I think she's brought it more to mainstream America. So thank you for that. I mean, even to the point where the U.S. military is hiring her, right, to come in and work with them and their leadership. So I think we're doing a much better job, Kate, to be honest with you. I think where, you asked me like, where do we get mentorship wrong? Where I think we get vulnerability wrong is I don't look at vulnerability as the opportunity to just, right? So backing up, I am a Chinese American military dependent. So there's nothing about those words strung together that says it's okay to whine and cry. Yeah, like there's no showing of emotions between the tiger
Crying in baseball, there's no crying.
There's no crying in baseball. Yes, thank you, Tom Hanks. So for me, I look at vulnerability as, being able to come from a real space. Like, so we talked about that in really interesting interview that I had with that one gentleman. That was being vulnerable, right? He was sharing with me, like at the end of the day, this is what I need to get done. And I was sharing with him, well, this is why I'm doing this. And so we cut through all the crap in order to get to where we needed to be in order to advance and solve a problem. Right. And so I think with vulnerability, the way that we can normalize it is not looking at as an opportunity to just and be like, well, you just have to deal with me, right? It'd be lovely if we all wore signs that said, my mood is this, and this is what I'm dealing with today. And then that way we'd be able to like figure out the other person a little bit faster. But at the same time, the reason we don't have those signs hanging on us or the billboards over our head is because this is the human side of who we are. We need to show up in a way that is honest and real. But at the end of the day, everybody wants problems solved. They don't want more problems dumped on them. So if you come at it from that thing, I think vulnerability, people would embrace it all the time. Like, yeah, you're giving me real information. You're being very honest with me. And at the same time, you're going to help me solve this problem.
Right. Exactly. It's the other half of the equation.
Yeah.
Well, so, okay, as you're growing this movement, because to me, that's really what this has the potential. It's a platform. It's a
Thank you.
It's hard. I mean, you don't always know which way is what, and pressure's high, and there's just the realities of running a business. What are your go-to principles or like questions that you go to when you're feeling, oh my God, what am I going to do next? Are there any just sort of grounding, or whenever I'm feeling afraid, I say this, or I think of this, or I go to this?
Yeah, so many.
That's the best practice.
Well, so, I think it's a little bit easier for me to tackle this one than maybe most people because I had that nice little brush with death. So that sort of sets your compass.
Stays with you.
Yeah, that sets your compass in a way where you're like, all right. So there was that, and now we need to do better than that. But for me, it's really, and somebody asked me a long time ago, was that the changing point in your life? And the honest answer to that is no, interestingly. Mm-hmm. So a few years before that, I was asked to do this program called Profiles in Success. And it was an honor, quite honestly. And I sat with the gentleman, Gordon Bernhardt, and he interviewed me and he provided me with the transcript. And, it was similar to what, we're discussing, just having a conversation about like, so what you doing? Who are you? All that good stuff. And it took me a long time to actually open the Word document that came back to me because I don't know, there was something in me that didn't sit right as to really, do you want to read these words? But I had to get it back to them. And I finally did open the document, and I was so late in opening it. They were really mad at me, but they were they were giving me a lot of grace. And when I opened it, I read it and I hated it. I hated the story of my life. Oh. And I called Gordon and I said, I am so sorry to have wasted your time. If it's okay with you, I would like to retract this article because I think I've got some work to do. And he was like, what are you talking about? And he'd said all the right things about, you could leverage it for this and that and the other thing. It wasn't something that I was proud of. And I said to him, I tell you what, if you're still doing this and I'm, moving forward in life, and I actually have something that is interesting and worthy of sharing, I'll come back to you and we can revisit this. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. And so we are still friends to this day. I am the only person that he's interviewed out of hundreds of people that have redacted their story because I did not feel like I was doing a good enough job. I was living a life, but I wasn't living a legacy.
Right.
And that was the difference. So when you ask, like, what's that thing? My thing is start with the end in mind. And what is that legacy that you want to live? Now, listen, I can say this because I've lived, several decades of life. We'll keep the number under wraps, but I've lived several decades of life. And in the reinvention of self and all of that, I've done things that are fun. I've done things that are challenging. I've done things that have, created income for myself. I've done a lot of those things. I had not done anything that I felt like this is what I want the epitaph to be later on. And so for me, it was, what is that? And when I finally founded TERN, it was like, okay, this is the legacy that I want to live. And now I get to share the legacy with other people that want to be mentors. And I get to serve my younger self because I was first generation, going through college. My military father was tapped out on how do I help her when she graduates. My Chinese born mother immigrated to Taiwan and then to the United States. She was like, yeah, you've got 2 siblings and you've got all these cousins and you got to figure this out. And so I get to serve my younger self today. So it's kind of both ways. Those are my guiding lights. Those are my guiding principles, is living the best legacy and helping others to do the same. Should they choose, they can come to us at TERN Mentoring. We're happy to support in that regard. But no, I haven't gone back to Gordon yet because my work's not done, and I stay in touch with him. But it's gonna be some time. It's not yet. It's not yet.
You're just getting started. You're not near complete. Well, Tina, thank you so much. I was going to ask, what advice would you give your younger self? But I think you just shared it. And that was put. And that's just a fabulous, oh my gosh, leaping off point for listeners to just savor that morsel. But thank you so much for joining me and the listeners, and so appreciative of everything you're working on. We're going to be sharing all the information on how to get in contact with you and websites. And obviously people do not want to either become a mentor or frankly, to receive mentorship, because it can take you to a whole new level.
Thank you for that. It's been so much fun. I knew it would be, Kate. I enjoyed meeting you the first time, and I enjoy every interaction with you afterwards. So thank you so much.
Thanks. All right. Till next time. What a terrific conversation with Tina. I adore her energy and, frankly, her vulnerability and transparency. So KB's takeaways, 3, pure and simple. 1, living a life, not a legacy. Making sure that you are spending your time with this one precious life, to quote Mary Oliver, doing what you want to do with whom you want to do it. I know for some that may sound like, oh gosh, that's lucky, I can't do that. Even in some way, find a part of your life where you could, because I guarantee you can. Everybody can be a mentor. There's something to learn from everyone. So when the next time you're at a networking event, just realize there's some pearl in the majority of the people there. So don't be so surface and quick to pass somebody by. You might be missing the opportunity of a lifetime. Broken heart syndrome, real deal. That can happen when you've given up on yourself. So don't. Have faith in yourself, one step at a time. You'll get through it. And lastly, in order to do that, you got to step back to move forward. And sometimes that means you've got to make a really big, courageous decision and then go for it. All right. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode. Look forward to chatting more on the next one.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. Be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Ta till next time.